Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jeffrey Uslip, and I'm the Chief Curator here at the Contemporary Art Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Contemporary Art Museum's inaugural academic symposium titled Natural Disasters, Free Speech, and the Death of Painting. We're delighted to partner with Washington University to host today's event, and I'd like to thank Sheren, Assistant Professor of Art History at Washington University, who will join me in moderating today's program and facilitating what we hope will be an active and dynamic conversation. I'd like to thank our four speakers, Marci Kwon, Chelsea Freilich, Alex Bacon, and Suzanne Hudson for joining us today and sharing their scholarship with our community. I'd also like to thank our Executive Director, Lisa Melandri, for her steadfast support of the project, and Alex Elmstead, CAM's Manager of Public Programs and Interpretation, for providing the infrastructure to articulate today's event. At the onset of our symposium, we challenged ourselves to conceptualize how a contemporary art museum could function not only as an exhibition space, but also as a site for art historical scholarship. Not only allowing our exhibitions on view, in our case, Goode and Jesse Howard, to encourage a larger, more expansive critical inquiry into the artwork's overarching themes. Our Goode and Jesse Howard exhibitions allow us to reconsider the construction of an American consciousness through the lens of a lived Midwestern experience. By bringing the work of Goode, an artist born and raised in Oklahoma, yet widely understood as an icon of Southern Californian art, back to the Midwest, we have an opportunity to recontextualize his artistic practice in the milieu from which it came. For example, Joe's monumental Tornado Triptych, which was created at LACMA in 1992, is being experienced for the first time outside of California, allowing the work to viscerally resonate with a renewed criticality. While Joe was foundational to the formation of a Californian art historical narrative, this exhibition elucidates local anxieties rooted in the region, the omnipresent threat of natural disasters, and the influence of the vast Midwestern sky on the individual psyche. Furthermore, Joe's formative experiences in the Midwest allowed him to rethink and advance the efficacy of the monochrome. For example, the quotidian availability of shotguns offered Joe the material freedom to shoot through and blast through pictorial spaces, transforming his monochromes from two-dimensional surfaces into a series of sculptural abrasions. Simultaneously, the Jesse Howard exhibition, titled Thy Kingdom Come, offers an in-depth examination into the social and political beliefs of one of America's seminal self-taught artists, evangelists, and advocates of free thought and free speech, who lived and worked in Fulton from the 1940s through the early 1980s. Through the presentation of almost 100 hand-painted signs, the exhibition provides a comprehensive first-person account of what life was like in this part of the region, as the artist struggled to reconcile turbulent national events, including the Vietnam War, alongside fraught local realities such as vandalism and persecution. Taken as a whole, these artists encourage us to think through diverse themes, including the role of the self-taught artist in America and how their unique position influenced modern and contemporary aesthetics, intertextuality and the material relationship between word and image, and finally, the agency of the painted monochrome. With that context in mind, Isla and I will alternate introducing each speaker and then welcome questions from the audience following the presentation. Our first speaker, Marci Kwon, is an advanced PhD candidate at NYU Institute of Fine Arts. Marci is currently working on her dissertation titled Vernacular Modernism, Joseph Cornell and the Culture of Populism, which has been supported by the Getty Research Institute, the ACLS Luce Dissertation Fellowship in American Art, the Modernist Studies Association, and the Mellon Foundation. She will spend 2015 and 2016 as a pre-doctoral fellow at the Smithsonian and has served as a curatorial research assistant at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She currently holds a Joan Tisch Teaching Fellowship at the Whitney Museum of Art, and her writing has been published by University of California, Irvine, Yale University Press, Modern Art Asia, and White Wall Magazine. Today, Marci will be presenting her paper titled Folk Surrealism, Joseph Cornell and at the Museum of Modern Art. Please join me in welcoming Marci Kwon.
Thank you to WashU, to Cam, to Alex, Isla, and especially Jeffrey for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited about the event. So on December 19th, 1936, the Museum of Modern Art opened an exhibition described by critic Russell Lines as the first truly chic event in its history. Curated by Alfred Barr, Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism included over 700 examples of the surrealist tendency in fine art, film, animation, and design. In one characteristically dense gallery, an unassuming glass vitrine sat tucked between freestanding sculptures by Jean Moreau and Marcel Jean. This modest display featured several works by Joseph Cornell, including a Wunderkammer of glass vials, 10 delicate glass bell jar sculptures, and soap bubble set of 1936, Cornell's first glass front box. Cornell would describe this last work as a real firstborn of the type of case that was to become my accepted milieu. Over the next 4 decades, Cornell would make hundreds of boxes, including close to 100 variants of soap bubble set alone. Utilizing the box format's deep space, rectilinear frame, and sealed glass front, Cornell transformed ephemera gathered from the streets and jumble shops of New York City into self-contained worlds, as widely beloved as they are misunderstood. As I will discuss today, Cornell's boxes emerged not from the hermetic depths of his imagination, but from the cataclysm of the Great Depression. This unprecedented crisis posed a dilemma for artists. While the modernist experimentation of the 1920s had emphasized the breaking of tradition by the talent of the individual, by the 1930s this concern was overshadowed by the search for a collective American culture. The seemingly incompatible ideals of rupture and continuity gave rise to a diverse array of artistic practices across the ideological spectrum, as artists, critics, and institutions attempted to, quote, collapse distinctions between production and consumption, artist and public, to cite historian Joseph Enton. The story of Cornell's first box begins with MoMA's attempts to answer these fraught conditions through its engagement with folk art and surrealism. The atavistic primitivism latent within these narratives would come to the fore in Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism, MoMA's boldest attempt to reconcile avant-garde expression and broad accessibility. As I will argue, Cornell created Soap Bubble Set to set himself apart from this infantilizing institutional context. The work represents a more complex and ultimately more successful strategy for negotiating the contradictory artistic and political demands of the turbulent 1930s than MoMA could ever hope to achieve. In an off-sided irony, MoMA opened to the public just days before the stock market crash of 1929. Its first 3 years of operation coincided with the nadir of the Great Depression, the pre-New Deal era famously described as the years of the locust. Although MoMA's charter defined its mission as educational, its 4 wealthy founders, including Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, hoped to create a venue for modern art comparable to the Tate Gallery in London or the Musée Luxembourg in Paris. Unsurprisingly, many saw the museum as a symbol of the elitist culture that gave rise to the Great Depression. Of course, you can see MoMA's first site in the background with the plaza in the foreground. As New Dealer Edward Bruce would sneer in 1933, MoMA was, quote, the little snob which was recently dedicated by the Rockefellers, who would put their dead hand on everything they touch. MoMA thus found itself at odds with the emergent collectivist tenor of the 1930s, encapsulated by Franklin Roosevelt's call to solidarity during his first inaugural address. If I read the temper of our people correctly, Roosevelt declared, we now realize, as we have never realized before, our interdependence on each other, that we cannot merely take, but we must give as well. MoMA's early exhibition history attests to the museum's attempts to answer this imperative. The list of early exhibitions is surprisingly Catholic for an institution widely associated with the teleological modernist canon, and includes shows of architecture, theater, industrial design, film, and folk art. While art historians have tended to view these endeavors as evidence of Barr's reactionary nationalism, an attempt to create a so-called American modern art, Barr saw them as engendering accessibility. As he wrote to Dwight MacDonald, quote, we hope that showing the best in these arts of popular entertainment and of commercial and industrial design will mitigate some of the arcane difficulty of the atmosphere associated with painting and sculpture. MoMA's early exhibitions of folk art were perhaps the most overtly political example of this tendency. In late 1932, the museum opened American folk art, Art of the Common Man, curated by Holger Cahill, who had spent time in the village during the anarchist teens and had reportedly been Thorstein Veblen's favorite pupil at the New School for Social Research. And so that's Cahill on the left, and on the right, you can probably make out, unfortunately, there are no extant installation images of American folk art, but this is actually a press photograph where we see a kind of old woman weaving a chair, which I don't know if you can make out, but she's actually weaving it in the shape of a modernist grid. So the phrase art of the common man signaled Cahill's intervention into the period's vibrant debates over proletarian and radical art, which often addressed what truly counted as an art for the people. Yet the exhibition's checklist underscores the difficulty of balancing elitism and accessibility in an institutional context. All but one of the works in the show were drawn from the collection of Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, of course, a devoted patron of folk art. Cahill would continue his devotion to folk art when he took up the directorship of the Federal Arts Project of the Works Progress Administration in 1935. With his departure, MoMA began to promote Surrealism as a new art of the common man. Like folk art, Surrealism privileged so-called direct or untrained expressionist proof, or so MoMA hoped, of its anti-elitism. To buttress this thesis, MoMA turned to the work of children as a means of demonstrating the broad accessibility of modern art. For example, Cahill included the work of children in his 1934 Westchester Folk Art exhibition and the 1935 New Horizons of American Art, which showcased a year of work sponsored by the FAP. And so here you see an installation photograph of New Horizons. Both exhibitions included educational programs intended to teach children basic artistic principles and integrated the resulting works into the exhibition. This practice was partially due to the 1934 publication of John Dewey's Art and Education, which emphasized artistic process as a mean of learning, as I'm sure Suzanne will talk about at some point today. Yet this resurgent interest in pragmatism was only part of the museum's turn to folk art, surrealism, and children's art, and certainly does not explain Barr's decision to acquire all the children's work shown in the New Horizons of American Art. For Barr, these works were actually art rather than merely byproducts of an educational process. So here, I don't know if you can make it out. Oh, you can't make it out at all, but it's a letter in the archives for the New Horizons in American Art show, and there are actually about 15 letters, which is Barr writing to the children who participated in the show, asking to purchase their works for the price of a museum membership and a copy of the catalog. So Barr also included the work of children in Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism, the second of a series of exhibitions surveying the major tendencies of 20th century art. In the exhibition catalog, Barr wrote that he hoped to illuminate a universal human tendency towards, quote, psychological interest, bizarre, dreamlike, absurd, uncanny, enigmatic, objects of concrete irrationality. He continued, surrealism as an art movement is a serious affair, and for many it is more than an art movement, it is a philosophy, a way of life, a cause to which some of the most brilliant painters and poets of our age are giving themselves with consuming devotion. The show's dizzying scope, which featured painting and sculpture from the 15th to the 20th centuries, installed alongside Disney animation stills, the work of children, folk art, and the quote-unquote insane, underscored Barr's thesis of universality. Indeed, Barr insisted the exhibition title included the phrase fantastic art to account for this diverse display, despite André Breton and Paul Éluard's vociferous objections. MoMA's framing of surrealism as achievable by even children and the insane posed a particularly vexing challenge for Joseph Cornell. Cornell was by definition a liminal figure. He was a man with no artistic training but a fine education at Phillips Andover. He worked in New York and was intimately familiar with avant-garde art, but lived in the decidedly provincial borough of Queens. He worked in a surrealist vein, although he was an American. And of course, here I've kind of juxtaposed two images of Cornell on the left, with his mother in Bayside in 1929. But on the right, from almost roughly contemporaneous, is an image taken by Lee Miller of him with one of his objects. So it kind of shows you the two sides of Cornell at this moment. Cornell thus became a crucial figure for American art at this moment, a bridge between the European avant-garde and the folk art MoMA hoped would save it from obsolescence. The framing of Cornell as a folk art artist, which I might add persists into the present day, began with his emergence in the New York art world in 1931. His work was often described as toys for adults, and he was included in Sidney Janis's 1941 folk art exhibition, They Taught Themselves. And although Cornell was shown in the surrealist section of Fantastic Art Dot and Surrealism, Barr still identified him as self-taught in the catalog. Cornell himself was acutely aware of this discourse and attempted to shape it in his correspondence with Barr about the exhibition. Specifically, Cornell asked Barr to correct an article in Harper's Bazaar that described his work as objectifications of his dreams. As Cornell lamented, they wrote, that if I dream of sticking a needle in a wooden ball, when I awake, that is what I do. He continued, I do not share in the subconscious and dream theories of the surrealists. While fervently admiring much of their work, I have never been an official surrealist, and I believe that surrealism has healthier possibilities than have been developed. Cornell's simultaneous embrace and rejection of surrealism illuminates the dilemma he faced at this moment. On one hand, Cornell owed his debut at the Museum of Modern Art to his affiliation with surrealism. And on the other hand, his status as a fine artist was threatened by the rhetoric of amateurism surrounding the movement. For Cornell, maintaining the status of a fine artist was more than just a matter of pride. He first presented himself as an artist to the gallerist Julian Levy in late 1931, desperate to support his family after nearly a year of unemployment. In the same letter, Cornell requested a glass vitrine to protect his works and asked to arrange them himself. Certainly, the delicacy of his objects contributed to this request. We might also see the glass display as a strategy for maintaining his liminal position, as he had struggled to do in his letter to Barr. The display case allowed Cornell to maintain his place in the exhibition while maintaining a sense of distance from its works. Cornell's intuition about the importance of institutional framing proved spot on. For hanging near his vitrine was a framed drawing by the 11-year-old Jean Hosington of East Lansing, Michigan. And I don't know if you can see it, but that's the kind of framed image on your left. Yet perhaps the most eloquent argument Cornell presented for his artistic intelligence was Soap Bubble Set itself. The box is made of components from earlier works by Cornell. The dolls had first appeared in a 1932 photograph by Lee Miller of one of Cornell's objects and reappeared alongside the pipe, egg, and white cylinders in a series of photographs by George Platt Lynes. Line's photographs show the components of soap bubble set before they entered the box, spilling across the frame in an artfully haphazard way, ready for a window display or a magazine layout. In comparing these photographs with the finished box, we can begin to see how the box format allowed Cornell to create dense webs of formal and conceptual relationships among the various objects contained within. Cornell divided the space of the box using glass shelves whose edges are picked out in bright white paint. The composition is highly symmetrical, with the doll's head and egg flanking the main chamber and 4 white cylinders in the compartment above. The individual vignette of objects contained in each compartment gain complexity in relation to the rest of the compartments and the entire box. For example, the upper cylinders boast vignettes composed of 19th century prints. On the left, we see a rearing horse encircled by Saturn's rings, the same planet that punctuates an Italian landscape on the right. Saturn's presence in both scenes infuses the display with a sense of narrative temporality, while its change of scale from large to small, from near to far in both, implies a transformation of the viewer's space and position as we move from one scene to another. Cornell's experiments with scale continued to the compartments below, which juxtapose a map of the moon's craters with the tiny objects in the foreground. As with the two collages, the simple placement of small next to large, object next to image, expands the few centimeters separating the egg and the moon into thousands of miles, encompassing terrestrial atmosphere and celestial space. The white clay pipe in the foreground of the box is in fact a popular toy for blowing bubbles. These infinitely expanding spheres float from ground to sky, linking the two and transforming breath into, quote, fragile, shimmering globules which become the shimmering but more enduring planets, as Cornell himself put it. Cornell's use of glass mirrors affirm this interest in reflective surfaces. The transparent shelves, mirrored floor, possibly intended as the surface of the ocean. Indeed, when you kind of peer down at the box, you can see the mirrors kind of expanding its space. And glass front serve as barriers and compositional elements, dividing the interior space of the box and separating the composition from the outside world, but at the same time capturing fleeting images and ephemeral light effects across their surfaces. As art historian Kristen Hoving has discussed, soap bubbles became a popular metaphor for scientific discoveries during the 1930s, illustrating concepts such as the ever-expanding universe. While Cornell was certainly aware of these conversations, his pain at the Harper's bizarre description should caution us against reducing his work to a single meaning. Like all of Cornell's boxes, Soap Bubble Set's intimate scale demands our attention, drawing us in ever closer, then expanding as we begin to perceive the relationships among the objects within. This effect is diametrically opposed to that of seeing a case of objects assembled by what the fantastic art data and surrealism catalog labels a psychopathic patient. While superficially similar in composition and material, the object lent to the exhibition by Andre Breton contains none of the complex conceptual relationships that structure Cornell's box. Instead, its composition is guided primarily by formal concerns, the size of buttons or the congruence of nail to pen nib. Moreover, rather than the simple array of buttons and thread in Breton's box, Soap Bubble Set boasts an exquisite selection of materials, sourced from 19th century books of engravings, astronomical treatises, and contemporary magazines, evidence of Cornell's connoisseurial approach to collecting. In short, Barr's exhibition had attempted to show that anyone attuned to their unconscious could be a surrealist artist, and Cornell's first box lodged a vigorous objection to this thesis. Even more important, however, the box format allowed Cornell to achieve this formal complexity without sacrificing accessibility. This was no doubt due to the box format's roots in a vernacular prototype, the Victorian Shadow Box, a popular middle-class decorating item during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The shell of Soap Bubble Set was in fact an antique wooden case which Cornell had lined with vibrant cobalt silk, now faded to pale gray. And the map of the moon that serves as the focal point of Soap Bubble Set was drawn from Camille Flammarion's 19th century book, Astronomie Populaire, which captured the cosmos in words and engravings for consumption by the French bourgeoisie. As its title suggests, the book was created to explain difficult scientific concepts to a wide audience. And Cornell's combination of vernacular forms and high artistic ideals achieved a similar effect. MoMA and Barr hoped fantastic art dot on surrealism would do the same for surrealism. But ironically, the exhibition's success was also the source of its failure. With the opening of the exhibition, surrealism became the hottest trend in fashion and entertainment, leading Harper's Bazaar to declare 1937 the year of the surrealists. Yet surrealism's crossover into the mainstream crystallized the exhibition's inherent challenge to the idea of art as a privileged realm of experience. Modern art doyenne Catherine Dreier disavowed Barr because of the inclusion of work by the insane, writing, quote, "It seemed as if you had deliberately hung the pictures to give the emphasis to the abnormal." Barr did little to dispel Dreier's fears, responding, quote, "Genius consists in the ability to retain insecurity, the imaginative faculties of childhood." Dreier was so incensed by this reply that she decided to withdraw her loans from the traveling exhibition and excoriated Barr's approach as dangerous. The show also strained his relationship with the museum board, most significantly and most ironically given her promotion of folk art, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. The critical response was equally harsh. In a characteristically xenophobic remark, Thomas Craven declared it, quote, "one of the foulest doses of arts ever compounded by the international apothecaries. The freaks of art belong in the tent show along with the two-headed calf and the tattooed idiot." In the New Yorker, a talk of the town item described overhearing a well-heeled couple remarking that they should not have thrown away their trash, for it could now be shown in a museum. Undergirding both the elite and critical response was the realization that a genuinely populist modern art would inevitably diminish art's capacity to stand apart from the messy realities, power structures, and commercial taint of the world around it. Of course, it was this effect that Clement Greenberg famously excoriated in his canonical 1939 essay, Avant-Garde and Kitsch. Surprisingly, to me at least, I was really shocked when I read it, that Greenberg actually liked Cornell's work. In his only review of Cornell's work, he called him a, quote, "greatly gifted artist," adding, "the stuffed birds, thimbles, bells, cardboard cutouts, and so forth, which Cornell puts into boxes faced with glass, pleased by their arrangement and the unspecified associations they call up, but mean or represent nothing but themselves." While obviously overstated, Greenberg was correct in proposing that Cornell's boxes created the fantasy of an autonomous realm in which the impossible concerns of the present could be perpetually suspended and frozen behind a pane of glass. Thank you.